I keep counting the years the way a man counts rations when the winter drags on too long. Not because counting changes anything, but because it gives my hands something to do when my mind won't stop touching the same wounds. I have lived inside pain so long that it stopped feeling like a visitor and started feeling like the shape of the house. People talk about aging like it's lines on the face and gray in the beard. But that's only what the world is allowed to see. Men age on the inside first. We age in the places no one touches. We age in the parts that never get rested. I was young once, and I didn't even know it. My youth wasn't spent. It was taken in small, ordinary thefts. A night without sleep here, a meal missed there, a day of hunger that turned into a month that turned into a habit that turned into the kind of hardness nobody praises while you're building it. Time didn't come at me like an enemy on a field. It came like a slow hand tightening around the throat while I kept doing what I had to do. And the worst part is how quiet it all was. There were no witnesses to the private war. Nobody stood near enough to see the moments when I almost folded and decided not to. Nobody heard the prayers that weren't beautiful, the ones that came out broken, the ones that asked only for enough strength to make it to the next hour without disgracing myself. If a man complains, people think he's weak. If he stays silent, people think he's fine. So I learned early that silence becomes armor, and armor becomes a cage. And you don't notice the bars until you've been living behind them for years. Pain becomes discipline because you don't get to stop. Suffering becomes identity because when everything else is stripped away, you still have to call yourself something. They say respect matters, but the truth is, respect often arrives late, like a doctor who shows up after the bleeding has already slowed, and then everyone congratulates him for saving you. I learned endurance before I learned anything that looked like happiness. Endurance was the first language spoken to me, the first lesson pressed into my hands. Happiness is for men with spare time, and I never had spare time. Not in my bones, not in my thoughts. Even when I stood still, something in me stayed braced, waiting for the next blow that always came. I don't cry loudly. I never did. Loud crying is for those who believe someone will come running. My tears are quiet, bitter, and ashamed. The kind you wipe away with the back of your hand before you turn your head, so nobody can claim they saw you fall apart. If a man has to be strong, he learns to bleed in places no one can point to. And after enough years of that, you stop being certain where the pain ends and you begin. I remember the first time humiliation taught me more than any victory ever did. And it wasn't a grand lesson. It was small, sharp, and personal. Like a blade slipped between ribs when you thought you were safe. Hunger was my early teacher. Not the kind that comes when you miss a meal and complain about it, but the kind that makes you stare at your hands and wonder how they can feel so heavy and still be empty. I learned what it means to be needed and still be unwanted, to be valued for my use and ignored as a person. That is how a lot of men are shaped. No one says it out loud, but they treat you like a tool and then act surprised when you become one. They praise the results, never the cost. They want the warrior, and they do not want the man. They want the toughness, and they do not want to look at the process that creates it, because the process is ugly and it leaves marks. I was taught to obey, to endure, to hold the line, to accept orders even when my stomach turned against them, because survival was always hanging above me like a rope. Fear was always there, but pride was there too. And pride is a strange companion because it doesn't comfort you. It just refuses to let you lie down in the dirt and stay there. I had moments where I wanted to be held like a child, wanted someone to tell me it would be all right, wanted a softness I didn't have the right to ask for. And I swallowed that want until it turned into a hard stone inside me. Men do that. We bury needs until they become weight, and then we call the weight strength, because nobody will respect you if you admit it's crushing you. I learned to keep my face steady while my insides shook. I learned to speak only what was necessary. I learned that in the eyes of others, a man's worth is measured by what he can carry without making noise. That is why humiliation builds more strength than praise. Praise makes you comfortable. Humiliation makes you precise. It makes you careful. It makes you impossible to surprise. It teaches you to read the room, to read men, to read danger in the smallest changes. A pause too long, a hand too close to a weapon, a laugh that doesn't reach the eyes. It teaches you to anticipate the next insult so it doesn't land as deep. It teaches you to harden in advance. And that is a kind of discipline no one celebrates because it looks like coldness. But coldness is what you become when warmth has been too expensive for too long. I didn't choose this shape. It was pressed into me by necessity, by betrayal, by the constant lesson that the world does not stop because your heart is tired. Defeat is a special kind of truth, because it doesn't let you pretend. Victory can lie to you. Victory can make you think you're more than you are. Defeat strips you down to what's real, and what's real is usually ugly. I have tasted defeat enough times that I know the flavor of it before it touches my tongue. It comes first as a heaviness behind the eyes, then as a tightness in the chest, then as that quiet moment when you realize you are alone inside your own head, and no one can help you decide what to do next. There were battles I lost on the field, and there were battles I lost afterward, in the silence, when the bodies were gone and the noise was over, and I had to live with what was done. People imagine war as shouting and steel and chaos, but the worst part is the calm that comes later. the kind of calm that leaves room for memory to work. A man can survive the fighting and still be destroyed by what he remembers. I watched men I trusted turn away when it was inconvenient to stand beside me. Betrayal is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just absence at the wrong moment. Sometimes it's a promise that quietly dies because the person who made it decided you were not worth the trouble. Those betrayals teach you to stop expecting. They train you to carry your own burdens, because asking for help becomes another way to be humiliated. And you start building a life that has no dependence in it, because dependence is a door someone else can slam. I became skilled at swallowing disappointment without letting it show. I became skilled at giving my loyalty without demanding it in return, because demanding it makes you look needy, and men like me cannot afford to look needy. That is how you end up surrounded and still lonely, respected and still unseen. When I speak of emotional abandonment, I don't mean a single person leaving. I mean the slow understanding that nobody is coming to save you from being yourself. I mean the realization that you can be useful to many and loved by none. That you can be the pillar and never be leaned on gently. And when you're built that way, rage becomes your fuel. Not the wild rage of shouting, but the cold rage of a man who refuses to collapse because he knows the world will step over him and keep moving. There is a kind of pride that grows in that place, a pride that doesn't boast, a pride that simply refuses to beg. It is not pretty, but it is durable. And durability is what I was trained for, not beauty, not joy, not ease. I endured because there was nothing else for me to do, and because I could not tolerate the thought of failing in a way that would make my suffering meaningless. The years blurred into each other. Campaigns and marches and nights that felt the same. Not because nothing happened, but because the body only has so many ways it can be exhausted before exhaustion becomes normal. Hunger, cold, heat, pain, fear, the waiting, the sudden violence, the long stretches of emptiness where you stare at the ground and think about nothing, because thinking about something would break you. That kind of life teaches you that a man is not made in his proud moments. He is made in the small humiliations he survives without losing his mind. He is made in being overlooked, in being ordered around, in being blamed for things he didn't cause, in being praised only when his usefulness is at its peak, and discarded the moment he slows. Men age internally because we spend so much time bracing. Even when we rest, we are not resting. We are listening. We are calculating. We are remembering. We are preparing. I saw younger men come in with fire in their eyes and leave with that fire turned into a dull coal. And I watched them try to smile like nothing changed, because that's what you do if you want to keep your place among men. The truth is, suffering does not always make you noble. Sometimes it just makes you tired. Sometimes it makes you suspicious. Sometimes it makes you harsh. People want the story where pain becomes wisdom, but a lot of pain just becomes pain. Wisdom, when it comes, is dragged out of the wreckage, and it comes with a cost you don't get back. I learned that discipline is not a choice you make once. Discipline is a chain of decisions you make every day when you would rather stop. It's waking up and moving even when your joints feel like they've been filled with sand. It's eating when you can, sleeping when you can, standing when you must, and never admitting how close you are to breaking, because admitting it feels like inviting it. Silence becomes armor, yes, but it also becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. And then you are trapped being the man who never speaks of his pain. People assume you don't feel because you don't show it. They assume you are built differently. They call you strong as if strength is a gift, not a debt you pay with your own blood. I don't remember praise with warmth. Praise felt like someone throwing a cloak over my shoulders in a storm, and then snatching it back the moment the wind calmed. The only thing that stayed was the grind, the daily proof that I could keep going. That is what built me. Not comfort, not kindness. The constant demand to function even when I didn't want to exist inside my own skin. If that sounds like bitterness, it is. Bitterness is not a mood. It's a residue left by years of swallowing what should have been said out loud. There were moments when life tried to offer me something softer, something human, and I didn't know how to hold it without crushing it. Emotional abandonment is a wound that doesn't bleed, so people forget it exists, but it shapes everything. I was absent even when I was present. My mind stayed at the edge of danger because that's where it learned to live. I could sit near a fire and still feel cold, because the cold was inside me, in the place where trust should have been. When I cared for someone, I cared with clenched fists, as if caring meant defending, as if tenderness was another battlefield. I have lost people, not only to death, but to distance, to silence, to my own inability to speak. A man who has lived too long inside survival does not easily become a man who knows how to love gently. He knows how to provide. He knows how to protect. He knows how to endure for others. But when it comes to asking for anything, even a little understanding, his throat closes. He would rather bleed than plead. That pride is both my strength and my punishment. I remember being young enough to think I could earn rest by working hard, as if the world keeps a fair ledger. It doesn't. The world takes what it can. The world rewards convenience. I watched men who had done less receive more, and I watched myself pretend it didn't matter. Because if I admitted it mattered, I would have to face the anger that would come with it. And anger, if you let it loose, can burn through everything you still have. So I kept it tight. I folded it and stored it. I used it like fuel. That is the dark motivation people don't talk about. Not the bright speeches, not the easy hope, but the stubborn refusal to be reduced, the refusal to be laughed at, the refusal to be pitied. Pity is worse than hatred because pity makes you small. I have lived in a world where a man is measured by what he can survive without asking permission to stop. So I became that kind of man. I learned to swallow grief the way you swallow bad water when there is nothing else to drink. Quickly, without tasting it, and then you feel it later in your stomach, heavy and sour. I have cried in private, the way men like me do, with my jaw clenched, with my hand over my mouth, not to make the sound of it, because I could not bear the idea of someone hearing me and thinking I was collapsing. Even in grief, I tried to keep my dignity, as if dignity could protect me from the truth that I was breaking in places no one could see. The cruel part is that people often respect you more once they realize you're running out. They start speaking well of you when you are too tired to enjoy it. They offer kindness when you no longer have the capacity to receive it. Respect late is like rain after the fire has already eaten the house. It feels almost insulting, even if it's sincere, because it highlights how alone you were when you needed it most. Later, when I had any authority, I learned a different kind of pain. The pain of responsibility. It is one thing to carry your own suffering. It is another to carry the weight of other men's fear, their hunger, their desperation, their hopes that you will know what to do. Leadership is not glory. It is being watched constantly and still having no one to lean on. It is making decisions that will haunt you and then wearing a calm face so the men behind you don't panic. I have sent younger men forward with words I knew were not enough, because there are no words that can make death less real. I have looked into faces that reminded me of what I once was, and I felt something inside me twist, not because I thought I could save them from hardship, but because I knew exactly how that hardship would change them. I knew how it would steal from them quietly, how it would strip laughter down until only a thin version remained, how it would teach them to hide pain behind jokes and silence, how it would teach them to stare into a distance even when nothing was there. And still, I asked them to go, because duty is not gentle, and a man does not always get to choose what he asks of others. That is a guilt that does not leave. People think guilt is loud, but it can be silent too. It can sit inside you like a stone that never dissolves. I have buried enough to know that grief does not end. It just changes shape. The exhausting part is how ordinary it becomes. At first, Loss feels like an emergency in the soul. Later, it feels like an old injury you adjust around. You learn to function with it, but it is always there. The hardest nights are not always the dramatic ones. Sometimes the hardest night is a quiet one, where nothing is happening, and your mind is free to walk through every face you failed to save, every promise you couldn't keep, every moment you chose survival over softness. A man can become dangerous to himself in that quiet, not by action, but by memory. Memory can be a weapon. It can strike without warning. That is why many men stay busy. That is why we chase tasks and responsibilities until we are worn down. Because stillness is when the past comes looking for you. I do not romanticize this. I do not call it noble. It is simply what I have done to remain standing. I have endured without witnesses. That is the part that makes it heavy, because if no one sees your struggle, it is easy for the world to treat your survival as inevitable, as if you were never at risk of falling. They don't know how many times I held myself together by the smallest thread of pride, by the stubborn belief that if I broke, I would become a story told with pity. I could not accept that. I still cannot. Now my body is no longer the weapon it once was, and that is its own humiliation. I used to trust my strength. I used to trust my endurance. I built my identity on what I could outlast. But age comes for the warrior in a way that feels personal. It does not arrive with a single blow. It arrives with small betrayals. A knee that refuses, a shoulder that burns, fingers that stiffen, breaths that shorten. The body starts charging interest for every reckless thing you demanded of it when you were young. I wake up and feel pain before I remember my name. That is not poetry. That is the truth of a man who has lived too long under strain. And the mind is worse sometimes. The mind keeps fighting long after the battle ends. It keeps scanning, keeps bracing, keeps tightening. I have learned that a man can become addicted to tension because tension is familiar. Peace feels strange. Silence without threat feels strange. Rest feels like laziness. Even when I sit, I am not at ease. There is always a part of me standing. There is always a part of me listening for footsteps. People see the older warrior and they speak of him with respect, but they do not see the private cost of that respect. They do not see the nights where sleep refuses to come because my mind insists on replaying what it has done. They do not see the mornings where I look at my hands and wonder how much of my life was spent clenching them. They do not see how often I have had to swallow tears, because tears feel like weakness, even when you are alone. Men like me are trained to be ashamed of our own softness. We treat our own grief like an enemy. We fight it. We lock it away. We discipline it. And then we wonder why our chests feel tight, why our breaths feel shallow, why our hearts feel heavy. The truth is, the heart was not designed to be a storage room for pain. But I made it one anyway, because I had no other place. I learned to carry sorrow the way you carry a pack that cuts into your shoulders. You adjust the straps, you shift the weight, you keep moving. You do not stop to complain, because complaining changes nothing. This is what people misunderstand about strength. Strength is not feeling powerful. Strength is functioning when you feel powerless. Strength is doing your duty with a mouth full of bitterness and still not spitting it into the faces of those who rely on you. Strength is refusing to take your pain out on the innocent. That is a discipline forged by humiliation, by having your own pride tested until it either breaks you or hardens you. Mine hardened. It also made me lonely. There is a cost to being the one who never collapses. People stop checking if you're okay. They stop offering help. They assume you have infinite reserves because you have never shown them the limit. And you cannot blame them entirely, because you trained them to see you that way. I have spoken to Allah in the way tired men speak when they are alone, not with polished words, not with performance, but with the raw honesty that comes when you have no audience to impress. I have asked for patience, not because I wanted to feel calm, but because I did not want to become unjust. There is a difference. A man can suffer and still keep his hands clean, or he can let suffering turn him into someone who spreads darkness like a disease. I have fought that second path more than I have fought any enemy. People think the greatest danger is what comes from outside, but the greatest danger is what you become when nobody is watching. I have been tested by rage, by pride, by bitterness, by the temptation to treat others the way the world treated me. I have not always passed. That is part of what weighs on me. Accountability is not a comfortable thing. It is a blade that cuts quietly. I know that hardship can be a means of elevation, but I also know hardship can expose what is ugly inside you if you let it. So I held myself to a standard even when I was exhausted, not because I wanted to look righteous, but because I feared the moment I would give myself permission to become cruel. A man can justify anything if he wants to. He can say the world was harsh to him, so he has the right to be harsh to others. That is the easy road. The harder road is to be strong without becoming rotten. I have tried to keep that line. I have tried to keep my prayers, even when my heart felt dry, even when my mind felt like a battlefield and the words came out like stones. I have tried to keep my dignity without turning it into arrogance. I have tried to keep my silence from becoming oppression. Silence can be wise, but silence can also be cowardice. I have learned to tell the difference the hard way. I do not speak about this to seek sympathy. Sympathy is light and it fades. What I speak about is the reality that a man can stand for decades and still feel like he is about to fall any day. Faith does not erase exhaustion. Faith does not magically return the years. Faith does not bring back the dead. Faith gives you a way to carry what cannot be fixed without losing yourself completely. And even then, the carrying is heavy. Sometimes I have made sujood and felt my forehead on the ground, and still felt the weight in my chest like a stone. Sometimes I have finished and stood up, and the world looked the same, and I realized that relief is not always immediate, and that patience is not a feeling. It is a decision repeated until the end. That is a harsh truth, but it is clean. It does not lie. It does not promise softness. It demands endurance with dignity. If there is any honor left in me, it is not from the battles people remember. It is from the private restraint, the times I wanted to lash out and chose not to. The times I wanted to give up and kept going. The times I wanted to curse my fate and instead held my tongue, because I knew my tongue could become another weapon. And I have carried enough weapons for one lifetime. There are days now when I feel like I am made of scars and habits, and I don't know which parts of me are truly mine and which parts were forced into me by necessity. When you live too long inside pain, you stop trusting happiness, because happiness feels like a trap. You wait for the price. You wait for the loss that will balance it out. You keep your joy small because you have learned the world can hear laughter and take it as a challenge. That is not paranoia. That is experience. I have seen good moments turn into bad ones without warning. I have seen men celebrate and then mourn in the same breath. I have seen promises shatter like thin glass. So I became cautious even with hope. Not because I wanted to be miserable, but because I couldn't afford the fall that comes after believing too much. People don't understand that caution can be a form of love. It's the love of staying alive. It's the love of not making your family bury you. It's the love of coming home, even when your pride wants you to die standing just to prove a point. I have carried that love silently, because men like me don't announce what we feel. We show it in what we do. And what I did was survive, over and over. Survive humiliations that made my stomach burn. Survive defeats that made my hands shake. Survive loneliness that made the nights feel endless. Survive the slow theft of time. I did not live like a man who believed life would reward him. I lived like a man who knew life would test him and wanted to be ready. That is the philosophy carved out of real years, not the kind you read and nod at. It is the philosophy of a man who learned that happiness is not the foundation, endurance is. You build endurance first, because without it, you will not reach any happiness that comes later. And sometimes, even if happiness comes, you won't recognize it because you have been trained to look for threat, not beauty. That is my tragedy. I can admit it now in the dark where nobody can use it against me. My tragedy is that I became so skilled at surviving that I forgot how to feel safe. I forgot how to be soft without shame. I forgot how to ask without feeling like I was lowering myself. These are not small losses. They are the losses that shape the rest of your life. People count the dead and call it the cost of war, but they don't count what happens inside the ones who return. They don't count the men who keep walking with their faces steady while something in them has been permanently tightened. They don't count the marriages strained by silence, the children who never heard their father say he was proud because the father didn't know how to say it. The friendships that faded because the warrior didn't know how to be human outside of duty. They don't count the invisible wounds because invisible wounds don't make for heroic stories. But those are the wounds that last. And still, after all of it, I do not collapse. Not because I am fearless, not because I am unbreakable, but because I have built my life on the refusal to be finished by what I have endured. There is no comfort in that statement. It is not a promise of a better tomorrow. It is simply the truth of how I have survived. I stand because I have stood for so long that sitting down feels like surrender. I keep my tears quiet because I was taught that a man's dignity is in his control, and control is the only thing that ever truly belonged to me when everything else was taken. I do not demand to be understood, but I know what it would mean to be understood, and that knowledge sits in me like a hunger of its own. I have been hungry for food, hungry for rest, hungry for peace, and hungry for a hand on my shoulder that did not come with conditions. I have learned that life does not always give what you deserve. It gives what it gives, and you decide what kind of man you will be inside that unfairness. I decided long ago that I would not become a coward, and I would not become a tyrant, and I would not become a man who uses his suffering as an excuse to harm others. That decision cost me. It cost me ease. It cost me softness. It cost me the ability to feel light. But it left me with something clean inside the dirt. A stubborn line I did not cross, even when crossing it would have made things simpler. If anyone ever hears this, it will not be because I wanted attention. It will be because the weight got too heavy to carry without at least letting the truth exist in words somewhere. I do not need applause. Applause is for performances. This was not a performance. This was a life. A long, grinding life of wars and defeats, and hunger and humiliation, and abandonment and betrayal and silence and survival. And if there is any lesson at the bottom of it, it is not gentle. The lesson is that a man is often forged in places no one will ever see. And the forging is not kind, and the heat does not ask your permission, and the hammer does not care if you are tired. You either hold your shape under the blows, or you shatter. And when you hold your shape, the world calls it strength and moves on. unaware of how many times you stood alone in the dark and begged your own knees not to give out. I am still that man, older now, slower, heavy in the bones, heavy in the chest, still standing, not because life is beautiful, but because I refuse to let pain be the last thing that ever spoke for me. And yet pain still tries to speak for me every morning. It tries to be the first voice in my head before I even open my eyes. It tries to remind me that I am not a man who wakes up refreshed. I am a man who wakes up returned to duty, returned to the same internal posture of bracing, as if I fell asleep only to reload. And sometimes I sit there on the edge of whatever bed or floor I have, and I listen to the body complain in its quiet language of stiffness and ache. And I realize with a cold clarity that I have spent more time managing damage than chasing dreams, more time patching myself than building anything beautiful. And there is a kind of grief in that which is hard to explain without sounding like I want pity, because it is not pity I want. It is recognition, not praise. Just the simple understanding that a man can do everything right by the standards he was raised under, and still end up hollowed out by the doing, because the standard was never designed to make him whole. It was designed to keep him useful. I think about how many times I forced my face into calm when I wanted to show exhaustion. How many times I swallowed anger because anger would have made me reckless. How many times I kept my mouth shut because speaking would have changed nothing and might have cost me everything. And I wonder how many parts of my personality were choices, and how many were survival reflexes that hardened into permanent shape. And the answer is not kind, because when a man lives too long in survival, survival stops being what he does and becomes what he is. And then, even when the danger is gone, the posture remains. The shoulders stay lifted. The jaw stays set. The eyes stay searching. The mind stays prepared to be disappointed. And that means you cannot fully receive the good, even if it comes. Because your body treats goodness like bait, and your mind asks what it wants from you. There were times I was offered warmth, and I turned it down without thinking. Not because I hated warmth, but because I didn't trust anything that didn't come with a price. And that is what war and betrayal and hunger teach you if you let them. They teach you that gifts are often hooks, that kindness can be a test, that affection can be temporary and therefore dangerous. Because once you let yourself depend on it, you can be controlled by the fear of losing it. So you stay controlled by yourself instead. You become your own prison guard. And people think you are disciplined. They call you composed. They call you steady. But they do not see the constant internal watchfulness, the constant monitoring of your own feelings like they are enemies trying to sabotage you. I have seen men with softer lives talk about self-care and healing, and all the clean words that sound good in rooms with warm lights. And I don't mock them. I understand why they say it. But I also know that for men like me, healing is not a weekend. It is not a lesson. It is not a concept you can hold comfortably. It is a long grind of learning to unclench without feeling ashamed, learning to rest without feeling useless, learning to hear your own thoughts without flinching. And the hardest part is that the world does not reward you for healing. The world rewarded you for being hard, for being efficient, for being silent, for being able to carry what others refuse to look at. So even when you try to become better, you feel like you are betraying the version of yourself that survived. You feel like you are softening the armor that kept you alive. And that fear is real. Because I have seen men open up and then be punished for it. I have seen their honesty used against them. I have seen their vulnerability treated like weakness. And once you've seen that, you learn that keeping your pain private is not only pride, it is strategy. It is self-defense. I think about my youth again, not with nostalgia, but with a kind of stunned anger. Because youth is not just energy, youth is time. And time is the one resource you cannot steal back. And it burns me that I spent mine proving myself to people who barely remember my name. I spent mine trying to earn respect from systems that never loved me. I spent mine trying to be enough for a world that always moved the line. And now that I am older, I can see the trick clearly. Respect was dangled like a prize, so I would keep sacrificing. And by the time it arrived, if it arrived at all, my best years were already spent, my body already paid, my heart already learned not to expect gentleness. I used to believe that if I just endured long enough, life would eventually become fair, that there would be some balance at the end, some sense that the suffering purchased something solid. But fairness is a story we tell boys so they keep trying. And when a man grows up, he learns that fairness is not a law, it is a hope. And hope, if you hold it carelessly, can make you lazy in the face of reality. So I held my hope the way a man holds a knife, carefully, without letting it cut him. And I trained myself to rely on what I could control, my effort, my restraint, my refusal to quit, because anything else could be taken. I have carried the memory of humiliations that no one knows about. Humiliations that were not dramatic, but were degrading in their simplicity. Moments where I was treated like I was less than human, where my needs were treated like inconveniences, where my loyalty was assumed, but my dignity was negotiable. And those moments taught me a brutal lesson. Strength is not built when people clap for you. Strength is built when you are alone after being shamed, and you decide you will not let the shame define you. When you decide you will not become smaller because someone wanted you to feel small. When you decide you will keep moving, even with your throat tight and your eyes burning and your hands trembling, because stopping would mean they won. And I do not mean they as some grand enemy. I mean the world itself, the way it tests you, the way it tries to see if you will crumble quietly so it can step over you. There is a specific kind of anger that comes from being underestimated, from having your sacrifices ignored, from having your pain treated like background noise. And that anger can ruin you if you let it become your whole personality. But it can also become a blade you use to cut through excuses. And that is what I did. I used it to become ruthless with myself, not cruel, but strict. Because if I allowed myself too much comfort, I would lose the edge that kept me alive. And over time, the strictness became automatic. It became the way I spoke to myself, the way I judged myself. And now, even when nobody is demanding anything of me, I demand something of myself, because I do not know how to be any other way. Because the moment I stop demanding, I fear the collapse. I fear the flood of everything I have held back. I fear the years of grief and rage and exhaustion coming down on me all at once. And a man can drown in his own feelings if he has been holding them under the surface too long. People who haven't lived this way think the hard man is fearless. They don't know that the hard man is often terrified of becoming soft, because softness feels like losing control, and losing control feels like death. Not always physical death, but the death of identity, the death of the image that kept him safe among men. I think about the men I fought beside, the ones who were loud, and the ones who were quiet. And I remember that the quiet ones were often the ones carrying the worst storms, because loudness can be a release, but quietness is containment, and containment is pressure, and pressure changes you. It makes you dense. It makes you heavy. It makes you slow to trust, slow to laugh, slow to admit you need anything at all. And then one day you realize that you have become a man who can survive anything except peace, because peace leaves you alone with yourself. I have watched younger men chase recognition like it is oxygen, and I understand them because I was them. And I want to tell them that recognition is a weak foundation, that if you build your self-worth on other people's eyes, you will starve the moment they look away. But men don't learn that from advice. They learn it from being abandoned. They learn it from standing in the cold after giving everything and receiving nothing back. They learn it from the moment they realize nobody is keeping score. And that is one of the cruelest moments a man can experience, because it forces him to decide whether he will still stand when the applause is gone. whether he will still be honorable when nobody is watching, whether he will still push forward when there is no reward waiting. And that decision is where real masculinity is forged. Not in loud strength, not in dominance, but in quiet integrity under pressure. I have been betrayed enough to know that not everyone who smiles at you wants you to succeed. And I have also been betrayed enough to know that some betrayals come from people who are simply weak, not evil. And that is another harsh lesson, because it means you cannot always protect yourself by avoiding bad people. Sometimes you are hurt by ordinary people who fail a test they didn't prepare for, who choose comfort over loyalty in a moment of fear. And then you are left holding the consequences of their weakness. And that changes you too. It makes you less sentimental, less naive, more realistic. And realism is often mistaken for bitterness. But bitterness is when you want to poison others. Realism is when you refuse to lie to yourself. My realism says this: most men are not abandoned once. They are abandoned slowly. They are abandoned in small ways that accumulate until they realize they have been carrying everything alone for years. And the moment they realize it is the moment they either harden or break. And I hardened. And I hate that I hardened, because I know what it cost me. But I also know I might not be here if I hadn't. Because the world I grew in did not reward softness. It exploited it. I have had moments of tenderness, moments where my chest softened unexpectedly. And those moments were dangerous, because they made me aware of what I lacked. They made me aware that I was still human under all the scars. And being aware of that humanity is painful when you have spent years denying it, because it brings up questions you don't want to answer. What kind of man would I have been if I had been loved properly? If I had been guided instead of thrown into harshness? If I had been respected before I was useful? If I had been allowed to be young instead of being forced to be hard early? And those questions can drive you insane if you let them, because they have no resolution. They are doors to rooms you can never enter. So I learned to close those doors quickly and return to what I can control. There is a particular shame in controlled tears, because you feel the weakness, and you also feel the discipline. You feel the emotion, and you also feel the hand around its throat. And you become aware that you are policing yourself even in private. And that awareness is exhausting, because it means you are never fully free, not even alone. You are always being watched by the part of you that believes softness is unsafe. I have seen men collapse into bitterness and become cruel to their families. And I have seen men collapse into emptiness and become absent even when they are present. And both are tragedies. And I have feared both paths. So I tried to hold a third line, the line of endurance without corruption, the line of strength without tyranny. But that line is narrow, and walking it for years wears your feet raw, because there is no applause for restraint. There is no celebration for not becoming a monster. The world does not congratulate you for controlling your worst impulses. It just expects it. And yet the moment you fail, the moment you slip, the moment you speak too harshly or act unjustly, you are judged as if the years of restraint never existed. And that is why many men stop trying to be good after too much suffering, because goodness feels unrewarded and failure feels punished. But I kept trying because I feared meeting Allah with a heart full of excuses. I feared using my pain as an argument, because pain is not an excuse for zulm. Pain is a test. And a test does not become easier because you complain about it. It becomes easier only if Allah grants ease. And I have seen that ease sometimes comes quietly, not as comfort, but as the ability to keep a clean intention under strain. I have prayed with a back that hurt and a mind that would not stop running, and I have still bowed. Because bowing is not about feeling spiritual. It is about remembering who you are in front of the one who sees what no one else sees. The one who sees the nights you did not sleep, the insults you swallowed, the temptations you resisted, the anger you restrained. And even if the world never recognizes that, it is recorded. And that knowledge is one of the few things that can keep a man from turning poisonous. But even with that knowledge, exhaustion remains. And some days the exhaustion is not just physical, it is existential. It is the exhaustion of being the one who always carries, the one who always absorbs, the one who always endures. And you start to resent your own reliability, because your reliability becomes the reason people lean on you without asking if you can hold it. And you become trapped by your own reputation, because if you finally say, "I cannot," people look at you like you are failing them, even though you have been carrying them for years. I have felt that resentment, and I have hated myself for feeling it, because resentment feels petty. But it is not petty when it is built out of chronic depletion. It is a signal. It is the soul saying it is tired, and the soul has rights too. But men like me treat our souls like servants. We tell them to keep working. We tell them to stop whining. We tell them to be grateful. And sometimes gratitude is real, and sometimes gratitude is just another whip you use on yourself. I am not proud of how hard I have been on myself, but I understand why I was, because nobody else was going to be hard for my benefit. Hardness from the world is often careless and cruel. Hardness from the self can be purposeful. It can be directed. It can be the difference between collapsing and continuing. And I chose continuing, again and again, until continuing became instinct. There is another kind of grief that comes with age. Not just grief for the dead, but grief for the living versions of yourself that will never exist again. The version of you who could run without thinking, the version of you who could laugh without suspicion, the version of you who believed that effort would be met with fairness. And when those versions die, they don't get funerals. They just disappear quietly, and you keep walking. And nobody knows you are carrying their ghosts too. I have carried the ghost of my own innocence, and it is heavy. Because innocence is not stupidity. Innocence is the ability to be open without fear. And once that is gone, you can never fully get it back. You can only learn to be wise without becoming closed. And that is a hard balance, because wisdom can turn into cynicism if you let it. And cynicism is a lazy form of intelligence. It is intelligence that has surrendered. It is a man saying, nothing matters, because he is tired of caring. And I have flirted with that surrender. I have stood near it in my mind. I have felt how easy it would be to stop believing in anything except survival. But then I remember the men who became that way, and how empty their eyes looked, how their laughter sounded like metal. And I refuse, not because I think the world is good, but because I refuse to be made hollow by it. There is a difference between being hardened and being hollow. Hardened still has structure. Hollow is just a shell. And I have seen too many shells walking around pretending they are men. I am tired, yes, but I am not empty. I am full. Too full sometimes. Full of things I never spoke. Full of grief that never got the respect of tears in front of anyone. Full of anger that never got the relief of being shouted. Full of love that never got the language it deserved. And that fullness is suffocating, because you cannot put it down. You cannot share it without risking being misunderstood. And misunderstanding is another kind of humiliation, maybe the worst kind, because it makes you feel foolish for ever thinking you could be seen. Still, I speak to myself because silence, while it is armor, can also be a slow death. It can rot you from inside. And I have learned that a man must sometimes let truth breathe, even if it only breathes in the dark. I have learned that masculinity is not the absence of pain. It is the management of pain without becoming unjust. It is the ability to suffer without using suffering as permission to abandon your responsibilities. It is the refusal to turn your woundedness into a weapon against those who did not wound you. And that refusal is not noble. It is simply necessary if you want to meet Allah with something other than excuses. I do not romanticize my endurance anymore. I don't call it heroic. I call it what it is. A habit built through humiliation, a refusal built through fear, a discipline built through repeated discomfort. And if there is anything inspiring in it, it is not that life can be conquered. It is that a man can be crushed and still remain upright. Not because he expects reward, but because he refuses to hand his dignity to the same forces that tried to strip it away. Some days, I feel close to the end of my strength, and that scares me not because I fear death. Death is a certainty. But because I fear becoming careless in my final stretch. I fear letting exhaustion loosen my grip on my own akhlaq. I fear saying something I cannot take back. I fear letting bitterness spill onto the innocent, because the older you get, the less energy you have to repair what you break. And I have broken enough things by accident in my life. I do not want to break anything on purpose. I want my strength, whatever remains, to be clean strength, not loud, not proud, just clean. The kind that does not need witnesses, the kind that does not need validation, the kind that bows to Allah and keeps moving, the kind that carries pain with quiet discipline, because that is what I have always done. And if I stop now, it will not be because life defeated me with one big strike. It will be because I finally got tired of holding myself together, and I cannot give that tiredness the satisfaction of winning. Not when I have endured this long. Not when I have watched others fall and kept walking. Not when my entire identity has been forged around the simple act of not collapsing. Even when collapse would have been easier. Even when collapse would have been justified. Even when collapse would have been understood by anyone who truly knew what it costs a man to keep standing when he has lived too long inside pain. And I know how it sounds when a man says he refuses to let tiredness win, because people hear refusal and they imagine energy. They imagine some fire still burning cleanly in the chest. But my refusal is not fire anymore. It is an old coal I keep alive with my breath. And some days, even breathing feels like work. Some days my ribs feel like they've been tightened by years of holding in words. And I sit with that pressure, and I realize that this is what happens when a man spends a lifetime being the container for everyone else's chaos. He becomes heavy even when nothing is happening. He becomes dense. He becomes the kind of quiet that makes rooms feel colder, not because he wants to be cold, but because warmth requires a looseness he never learned to trust. I think about the young men who looked at me like I was made of iron, and I want to tell them that iron rusts, that even the strongest metal corrodes when it lives too long in wet weather. And suffering is a wet weather that never truly dries. It gets into the joints. It gets into the thoughts. It gets into the way you interpret a smile, the way you hear a compliment, the way you notice how quickly people forget your sacrifices once they've taken what they need from you. And that is the part that makes me feel old inside. Not the physical ache, but the constant evidence that memory is rare, gratitude is rare, loyalty is rarer than men admit, and yet men still build their lives on those things as if they are guaranteed, and then they are shocked when the ground gives way under them. I have stopped being shocked. That is one of the most brutal signs of internal aging. When disappointment no longer surprises you, when betrayal no longer stings like a sudden knife, but lands like a familiar weight. When you can predict the exact moment someone will choose their comfort over your dignity, and you still show up anyway, because your own standards do not depend on theirs. Because if you let the world dictate your akhlaq, then the world owns you, and I refuse to be owned by anything except my Lord. And even that refusal, even that clarity, does not make the nights lighter, because clarity is not comfort. Clarity is simply seeing the cage for what it is and still having to live inside it. The loneliness of a man like me is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being internally unvisited. The loneliness of having a mind full of things you cannot put down, because the people around you do not have the strength to carry them. And you learn that the strongest man in the room is often the most isolated, because everyone brings their burdens to him, and nobody thinks to ask what burdens he has. And if they do ask, they ask lightly, like it's a polite question, not realizing that a real answer would change the air between you. So you give them a small answer. You give them something they can digest, and you keep the real weight to yourself. And that is how a man becomes a vault. And vaults do not get hugged. Vaults do not get comforted. Vaults are respected from a distance. And respect from a distance is just another form of separation. I have watched the way people talk about strength like it is a personality trait, like it is a simple choice. And I want to tell them strength is often an emergency response that never got turned off. Strength is what happens when you were not allowed to fail, when you were not allowed to be cared for, when you were not allowed to be weak without consequences. And after enough years, you forget that other men live differently. You forget that there are men who can admit they're tired and still be loved. You forget that there are men who can cry and not be treated like they've lost their worth, because your world trained you with a harsh rule. Your worth is your output. Your dignity is your control. Your safety is your silence. And if you violate any of that, you will pay. I paid early, so I learned, and I became disciplined. And discipline kept me alive. But discipline also stole softness from me, because discipline, when it becomes your only tool, treats every emotion like a problem to manage instead of a truth to honor. And I have managed myself so much that sometimes I wonder if I have ever allowed myself to simply be, without assessment, without correction, without that internal voice that speaks like a commander, always watching, always ordering, always saying, keep going, keep your back straight, keep your face calm, do not show fatigue, do not let them see you bleed. There is a kind of cruelty in that voice, and the cruel part is that the voice is mine. It was installed by necessity, but it is still mine. And you cannot escape a voice that lives inside your own head. You can only negotiate with it. You can only try to soften it slowly, without letting it turn you into a man who falls apart. Because falling apart is not a romantic tragedy for men like me. It is a real risk with real consequences. It means you fail the people who depend on you. You fail the duties you were entrusted with. You fail yourself. And worst of all, you fail the standard you tried to maintain before Allah. Because a man's trials are not only what happens to him, they are what he does with what happens to him. I have seen men use their suffering as permission to become careless with truth, careless with trust, careless with the hukuk of others, and they tell themselves they earned the right. And they might convince people who don't know better, but they will not convince the one who sees the hidden parts. And that awareness is one of the few things that can make a man like me swallow his bitterness when it rises. Because bitterness wants to be expressed. Bitterness wants to spill. It wants to cut people the way life cut you. It wants you to feel powerful by making someone else feel small. And that temptation is real. And pretending it isn't real is how men become hypocrites. So I admit it to myself. There were times I wanted to take what I could. Times I wanted to stop caring about fairness. Times I wanted to stop being patient. Times I wanted to say, if the world is unjust, then I will be unjust too. And the only thing that stopped me was fear. Not fear of people. Fear of meeting my Lord with a heart that had turned rotten. Fear of becoming a man who survives the battlefield, but loses the war inside his own chest. I have learned that the most dangerous defeat is not losing to an enemy. It is losing your inner line. Losing the boundary that separates strength from facade. Because once that boundary is gone, you can still function. You can still win. You can still be respected, but you will be empty. And emptiness is a punishment that looks like success from the outside. And I have never wanted that kind of success. I have wanted to be clean, even if I am tired, even if I am misunderstood, even if I am alone. Because at the end, when nobody's praise can help you, and nobody's insults can harm you, what remains is what you carried in your heart and what you did with your hands. Time has taught me that men are not destroyed only by suffering. They are destroyed by what they become while suffering. And that is why I do not trust motivational talk that offers comfort without cost. Because comfort without cost is usually a lie. And lies are dangerous because they make you lazy. They make you soft in the wrong way. They make you expect life to be gentle when life is not gentle. And then, when hardship comes, you feel betrayed by reality itself. And that sense of betrayal makes men bitter. And bitterness makes them careless. And carelessness is what ruins families, ruins friendships, ruins legacies, ruins faith, because carelessness is a crack in the foundation. I do not offer comfort, not even to myself. I offer honesty, and honesty is heavy, but it is stable. Honesty says you will be humiliated, you will be ignored, you will be tired, you will be misunderstood, you will be forced to swallow words you deserve to speak. And if you are a man of responsibility, you will carry weight without applause. And if you wait for applause, you will starve. So build yourself on something else. Build yourself on your own standards, on your relationship with Allah, on the knowledge that endurance is not glamorous, but it is necessary. And then when the world fails to recognize you, you will not collapse, because you were never built on recognition in the first place. I am saying these words to myself because I need them, because even now, even after all the years, there are moments when I feel that old child inside me, the one who wanted to be seen, the one who wanted to be valued for more than his usefulness. And I feel a sharp sting of grief for that child, because he deserved better, and I did not know how to give him better. I only knew how to toughen him. I only knew how to make him effective. I only knew how to make him survive. And survival is not the same as being cared for. Survival is not the same as being loved. Survival is not the same as being safe. And a man can confuse those things for decades because he has no time to separate them. He is too busy holding the line. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to live 1 year without bracing, 1 year without scanning faces, 1 year without preparing for disappointment, 1 year where my shoulders are not lifted in defense, 1 year where my laughter is not guarded, 1 year where I can accept kindness without suspicion. And the thought feels almost foreign, like imagining a language I never learned. And that makes me sad in a way that sits deep, because it means even if peace is handed to me, I might not have the ability to live in it properly. I might only know how to stand in it like a soldier who doesn't trust the ceasefire. And that is another harsh lesson people don't talk about. Suffering trains you, and training remains, even when the war ends. And undoing training is harder than enduring it, because undoing requires you to step into uncertainty. It requires you to loosen what kept you alive, and loosening feels like inviting danger. So you stay tight, and you call it discipline. And sometimes it is discipline, and sometimes it is fear wearing the mask of discipline. And a man has to be honest enough to tell the difference, because if you don't, you will carry unnecessary pain like it is a badge. And badges are meaningless when you are alone at night.